Hi. If you're using any coding assistant right now, there's a very good chance you have either heard about skills or you're already actively using it. Skills are basically bundles of instruction, resources, scripts that allow your coding agent to do a certain kind of work more reliably. And skills are an open standard now. OpenAI adopted them in Codex, Google adopted them in Gemini CLI, and now you have marketplaces like skill.sh. And I think skills are worth talking about on their own. But the best way to understand them is to compare them with something we already know from last year, MCP. And now, to be fair, MCP and skills, they both came from the house of Anthropic. And now there are people saying skills will replace MCP. And do we really need MCP now that skills can do the whole context engineering in a much more simplified manner? Now, I'm not so sure about the whole replacement part, and Anthropic's own guide has a really nice analogy for this. They say MCP gives you the professional kitchen, all the tools, all the ingredients, and then skills give you the recipes, the step by step instruction to do something meaningful. And I actually like that analogy because it captures what both of these standards are really trying to do. And at the same time, one has to say that at some levels, there is a degree of overlap. If you think skills are only for guidance or for static documentation, that's not quite true. You can absolutely write a skill that calls an API through a script or reach out to an external data source or some software and bring the result back. And on the other side, we have plenty of MCP servers that are basically there to expose service documentation and the best practices. So both skills and MCP can extend what an agent can do, but the way they extend the agent is quite different. And the place where that difference really shows up is the context window. With MCP, when your agent connects to the MCP server, it calls tools/list and gets back metadata about the tools that server exposes. That usually includes things like the name, description, and the schema. And to be precise, the MCP spec itself does not say that every tool schema has to be injected into the prompt on every single turn. That part is a host decision that depends on how the runtime chooses to surface those tools. And this is where some gateway layers like Amazon Bedrock Agent Core Gateway try to do smart things like semantic search over tools. So tool selection becomes a lot more efficient. But in practice, a lot of runtime today still fetch a lot of tool metadata upfront. And if you connect 3 or 4 MCP servers, let's say each with 10 tools, you can pretty quickly end up with 40 or 50 tools. And that's not a small thing. Perplexity CTO pointed to context window overhead as one of the reasons why they are leaning towards APIs in some internal workflows. But for now, let's stay with the point at hand. MCP can create context bloat depending on how the runtime exposes tool information. And skills work very differently. Skills use something called as progressive disclosure. I love that phrase. The idea is simple. At startup, the agent only sees the name of the skill and a short description, what it does, and when it should be used. That's tier 1, very small token cost. Then if your request matches the skill, the full skill.md gets loaded. That's tier 2. And then during the execution, if the agent needs more detail, it can pull in reference file, and that's tier 3. So every layer loads only when it's actually needed. Progressive disclosure. And there's another detail here that I think people don't talk about enough. Skills can include scripts, and those scripts can run locally on your machine. So only the output goes back to the agent. So if an agent has 30 available skills, it may only be carrying a small amount of metadata in context. And that gap gets bigger the longer the session goes on. So given all of that, I think the long-term pattern is probably going to look like skills layered on top of MCP for real external integration. If your agent needs to follow your team's PR review process, your security checklist, your deployment runbook, or your code migration step, that kind of knowledge does not come from a schema. And this is exactly where skills shine. Anthropic says use skills for workflow guidance and MCP for connectors. So once you say that you need both skills and MCP, the next obvious question is how do you package them together? And that brings me to Kiro Powers. Now, if you haven't used Kiro before, it's an agentic coding assistant from AWS, first party service, pretty cool features. I would focus only on Powers because they take the idea of skills plus MCP a step further. Instead of having all your tools and all your instructions present all the time, Power activate on demand. So let's say you have payment or checkout, the Stripe Power will get activated. Its MCP tool will get loaded. An agent will have both the tools and the instructions for the job. And let's say then you switch to the database work, then the strike power drops away and maybe some database related power activates. And this is the progressive disclosure, but extended to not just the instruction, but to the tools as well. And that's why I think Kiro powers are solving a real design problem. How do you give an agent live tools and process knowledge without flooding it with irrelevant context? Now, the only downside, at least for now, is that Kiro powers are specific to Kiro. It's not a standard like skills. I would be very surprised if you don't see more systems move in this direction. Anyway, let me know in the comments how you're approaching this in your own agentic coding setup. What are your experience with raw MCP, skills, plugin, power, or you have some kind of hybrid setup?